So now, moving from Riga and our virtual conference, I'd like to take you on a trip to the city of Bremen. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, here we go. There it is in northern Germany, just southwest of the city of Hamburg, is the beautiful city of Bremen in the North Sea region, but also as a member of the Baltic Sea region. Square, you may know the Bremen Town Musicians on the top right-hand corner, but Bremen is also known for being a very green city and a city on the water. As you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, the river Weser flows through the city, and we're just 60 kilometers off the North Sea with roughly 567,000 residents. And, sorry, there we go. Bremen is also known as a compact city. So the city is very accessible by bicycle, and the majority of the population can reach city center within 15 to 30 minutes by bicycle, as you can see here. And that compact urban structure influences our modal split in the city. More than 60% of daily trips are done by walking, cycling, and using public transport. And only 36% of the daily trips are done by using the private car. So I would say that's really quite good. Our transport policies are driven by, or transport strategies are driven by a number of policies that include our land use plan, which focuses on infill development and reducing space consumption, as well as our urban development concept, which sets an overall strategic goal for the city and the role it wants to play in the future. But our transport policies are driven specifically by our Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, which was passed at the end of 2014, and not only passed, but passed unanimously by our parliament, the parliament of the city of Bremen. And our SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, was the result of a really intense 2-year consultation process with public stakeholders, politicians, private stakeholders, and citizens. And it lays out not only a finance plan for mobility measures in the city, but also an implementation plan of over 200 measures in 12 priority areas. And those priority areas include, for example, some measures like improving the suburban railway connections so that the nearly 150,000 commuters that come in and out of Bremen every day have more convenient and sustainable travel options, and also faster travel options. Other measures include, in addition to improving the general cycling infrastructure, creating bicycle highway connections throughout the city and through the region to allow for fast and safe commuting through and across the city. And the question is why? A Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan is more than just a concept for moving people and goods. We have to remember it's because we're looking to create resource and space-efficient cities for people to live freely, comfortably, and also safely. The goal is also obviously to reduce transport-related emissions, improve local air quality, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But it's also about creating socially inclusive and accessible spaces for people of all ages and abilities, from young and old, people with limited abilities or not, and about quality of life. And I think that's so important for transport planners to remember, that it's about the big picture as well. But I think one of the things that makes Bremen's transport strategies so special is how we go about them, and not just the goals. And how we go about them includes the aspects of efficiency, efficacy, so how effective measures are, transparency, and occasionally being a bit avant-garde and maybe ahead of our times and a bit controversial. So let's talk about efficiency first. Efficiency in transport. So obviously reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transport, the often go-to solution seems to be e-mobility. changing the propulsion style. And let's see, this is an image of an average street in Bremen. Lots of cars, too many cars for the space, parked on both sides illegally, not enough space for pedestrians and cyclists. So what happens when a city invests widely in electric mobility? Let's take a look. This is before introducing electric vehicles. And this is after introducing private electric vehicles. It's the same situation. And that's something I think we need to remember, is that replacing the propulsion type does not help us solve transport problems. It only helps us address one issue. Public transport is and will always be the most efficient way to move lots of people. And in Bremen, we place a strong focus on that, public transport, and making it attractive and fast. For instance, by giving signal priority to buses and trams, by extending the network, and by having segregated infrastructure so that buses, for instance, can pass in queues. And with regard to promoting clean fuels, it makes sense to do this in public transport as well. An average city bus, a diesel bus, is in operation around 16 hours a day, whereas a private car is in use less than 1 hour a day. So from a city perspective, especially with limited resources, like the city of Bremen, it just makes economic and resource sense to invest in cleaner public transport. And in a previous European project, Elliptic, where we had many partners from the Baltic Sea region, we showed that one electric bus has the same effect as replacing 100 privately owned cars with electric propulsion. About efficacy, so how effective measures are. There, for example, we're very active in promoting the concept of car sharing, especially station-based car sharing or combined systems of station-based and free-floating car sharing. Because in combination with a healthy cycling culture and good public transport, car sharing can provide an attractive alternative to the privately owned car. And in research we did a few years ago in Bremen, we were able to show that one car sharing vehicle replaces 16 privately owned cars. So the roughly 19 or more than 19,000 car sharing users in Bremen were able to get more than 6,000 privately owned cars off the street already. So we promote car sharing as a city, but we also provide space for shared mobility in the form of mobility hubs that brings shared mobility services like car sharing into the public realm, makes it more accessible and more visible. And one interesting side effect is that it also has an indirect way of ordering these more disruptive transport modes, such as the e-scooters, who tend to naturally navigate to the mobility hubs as well. Transparency, I also mentioned. In the development of our Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, as well as now in the extension, so the Fortschreibung, public engagement has always played a very important role sort of in these classic settings with evening forums, but also going out onto the streets with local stakeholders, with the police, to gauge where problems are and also to explain about strategies and be really connected to the community. But now more so than ever, but also in the past, online engagement has been really important to allow people who are not able to attend those physical meetings or not interested still to share their opinions. So during our last SUMP, this transparent process was accompanied by people being able to map where they saw deficits or positive aspects in the city directly, and also in a gamification process where we are able to explain the complexity of transport planning. But also not forgetting marginal groups. We did the same sort of gamification process in local shopping centers, where we were able to engage with groups, especially children, who perhaps are not the typical target group for or typical participants, I would say, in engagement processes. So it's a three-tier process. And last but not least, I mentioned the avant-garde aspect. So I guess Bremen has a bit of a reputation of being rebels. We did so with our mobility hubs, planning way before there was any national or local legislation in place, starting in 2003, which was followed by the car sharing law implementation in 14 years later. And something similar we did with cycling zones. So you may be familiar with Fahrradstraßen, so cycling streets, which are very common in the Netherlands and in Belgium and Germany in the meantime, and of which we have several in Bremen. But 4 years ago, we also started planning and implementing the first cycling zone. And in July of this year, we were able to celebrate the completion of this cycling zone. And through this sort of avant-garde approach to policy, being convinced about the effectiveness of measures, we were able to influence national legislation and signage rather than waiting for it. So it hasn't always been easy, but as a colleague of mine says, if it's easy, it's nothing special. And the cycling zone covers a large area in just south of Bremen city center. And in this cycling zone, just to be clear, cyclists have the right of way over motorists. Motorists are guests in this entire zone. And that was followed by lots of public awareness work again, and physical infrastructure changes, and has been a great success so far. But just to the west of that cycling zone, almost a year ago, was a gathering of more than 30,000 people for the global climate strike here in Bremen. And now looking at this image now, I think it's hard for many of us to imagine this number of people coming together in one place. The COVID-19 crisis has changed our lives in so many ways that sometimes it's easy to forget that the climate crisis is as real as it ever was. So in this last image that I'd like to share with you, I'd like to encourage you to make sustainable transport a priority on your agendas again if it isn't, and for us to keep fighting that fight together to make sustainable mobility in our focus again. So I wish all of you an insightful 3 days. I'll enjoy participating in the sessions as well. And thank you for your attention.
Well done. Well done. It's 11 minutes. Very good. Very precise, very sharp to the point. And now we have some time for questions. And I have one for you. Like, knowing Bremen's really like a success and being a pioneer in mobility points and others, how you see right now where you stand, what's the biggest obstacle to this perfect multimodality, mobility? How you feel it, how you see it? What's the biggest obstacle? Just one. I know there is no like just one answer, but still.
It's always hard to not answer that question as a politician.
Okay, change your hat probably.
I'm not a politician, I'm a planner, luckily. I think the greatest obstacle, especially for a city like Bremen, is often not a lack of will, but a lack of financing, obviously. And that's why in my talks I like to focus on efficiency and efficacy, because we as a city always have to choose, especially if there's not a lot of money around, what's the greatest value for money, what's going to have the greatest impact, which measures are going to have the greatest impact for us to reach our sustainability goals.
Yeah, so you are measuring like, measuring and like impacts and money and then. Good. Question from Mars Janos. You see what's written in the chat? Yeah. I could repeat. Has the shift to online events changed the attending audience? Is it like elsewhere that younger people get to attend and they are readier for a change?
It's really difficult to gauge or the demographics for the online participation we're doing at the moment. I think it depends on time of day again, also on how well it publicized. But I have seen a great deal of appreciation, at least, that we are continuing to try to involve the public as much as possible, so that we can carry on with business as usual as much as possible. In the sort of gamification formats that we chose for the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, we definitely saw younger target groups participating in that. These are often, students or families who are able or not able to attend, or not interested in attending, evening events as well. And I find it's really important to diversify the formats, even now, as much as possible.